Hey guys and girls, happy October once again. I am bored now. Today I am here to talk about a recent release. It is called Marshmallow. It came out earlier this year. And it's one of the films I highlighted when I did my Fright Fest preview. It was one of my top 10 movies to see at Fright Fest this year. It's actually been kicking around a couple of years now, I guess, on the festival circuit. The best way I can describe it without going into spoilers first is it follows this kid Morgan who's just moved to a new town with his family. He's very isolated. He has nightmares. He loses his grandpa quite early in the movie, someone he was like close to, almost like a father figure who he was bonding with a bit more than his actual parents. And his parents send him away to a summer camp, familiar kind of summer camp type setup, which we've seen in like lots of horror movies over the years. He's bullied by a couple of the kids there, but he also makes friendships. He strikes up a bit of a bond with a girl called Pena, I think you say a name, and he becomes close with another kid who's kind of a little bit of an outcast himself, and they form a bit of a group. And the main idea of the movie is then they're told this old campfire spooky story, which is about a doctor and his monsters. And the most I can say without really diving into spoilers is that story manifests itself into becoming a real thing. But then there's a whole host of twists and things, reveals after that. So to sum up my thoughts before I get into some of that stuff, it's a frustrating movie really, because to me at least it's a movie of two halves. And I much preferred the first half when you were following the characters. Like the lead kid, Morgan, I think is a perfectly likeable, quite natural young kid. The actor's doing a decent enough job. I like some of the other characters, like Pena, the girl, who he kind of strikes up a little bit of a thing. She's very likeable. She's got a certain like attitude, which is quite entertaining to watch. Some good lines. And also, once you get into the summer camp stuff and get introduced to some of the counselors, I think they're quite good characters. And the thing with the movie is it changes so much later on, and the characters turn out to be, or a lot of the characters turn out to be what you don't expect. Then that probably changes some of that stuff. And maybe that's partly what I don't like. Counselors, you get to know them a little bit. Like, one thing it's doing is it's having fun with, like, the trope of the hunky jock character. He's got, like, a girlfriend. They're always, like, flirting and getting horny, and he walks around with his shirt off all the time. He's told by the lead guy who's running the camp to put it back on. And there's some fun banter with that, but they're having fun with that trope, which I quite enjoyed. And you see that really the other counselors are pretty grounded, pretty likeable. Like this girl, curly-haired blonde girl, Rachel, who you see quite a lot. She seems like she's quite likeable and decent enough. She has a certain attitude to her, but like she seems to care about the kid. And there's this other counselor, Franklin, who is really nice and is very good with the kids, and Morgan in particular seems to bond with him a little bit. Stuff back at home before we get to the camp is well done as well. Like the stuff with the grandpa is quite well done. Like that did feel quite relatable. And there's this whole thing where before he dies, he gives him a penknife. And that comes into play a little bit later on in the movie because he keeps the penknife with him, takes it to summer camp. But I think just some of the like fun jokes that the grandpa is making, like when he's kind of saying things like, do you want some more Merlot, Morgan? Or like calling the parents casually assholes, which might have been a bit far, but he's doing that thing of trying to be the cool grandpa and relate to Morgan on his like own terms. So that stuff is quite well done, and it does play into the twists later on. But just getting into the weeds with this movie, the twist and where it goes, it's the sort of thing where you're either gonna love it or you don't. Like, the people making this movie, I think clearly, and the people who enjoy the movie are gonna be like, "Oh my god, this was really a great twist on an old formula," and they're doing this thing where you can't take anything for granted, and there's all these, because I read a little bit online about how like there's all these modern themes, and it's all to do with culture nowadays, about how you don't question authority figures, or people don't question them enough, children aren't given enough information. And I can kind of see that. That sounds to me like it's a little bit reaching, to be honest, and that theme's being a bit tacked on. But just to get into the spoilers and the big twist, because I think for me they cheapen the movie and leave it a bit colder. And I think the problem is like, if it was just the one twist and then that was kind of, we see it play out after that, that would be better. But it's the sort of movie that gets carried away with the twist, where it keeps laying them on, laying them on. The story has come true, and then we see that, oh, you know, like the people helping to run the camp, the volunteers, they seem to be under his spell or something. There's a whole scene within like a surgical room with Morgan where he sees the doctor, and we see a bunch of people on his table, and it's meant to be like all freaky. So the big twist is that basically they're all in on it. The people running the camp are in on it. And I wasn't quite sure what the twist was meant to be at that point. And there's further twists, whether it was a way to like keep them in line, because there's a joke earlier in the movie where it's like, Penrose says to Morgan, "I've heard 5 different versions of that story." And it just, yeah, it's just something they use to keep you in line. So when the twist came, I wasn't sure, well, are they saying they do it to keep them in line? Because when things were getting out of control and Morgan and the others were like running loose, it became a thing of, oh my, we've got to go and get them. And it became like quite threatening. So I wasn't sure if like they're keeping them in line or trying to, or if it's like that they actually want to kill these kids. Twist on its own I didn't really like, because I think it cheapens the movie, and the problem is from that point on is they keep adding to it. So they keep adding to it where it becomes everybody who isn't a kid is in on it. So at one point they run to a cop, and I kind of saw that coming, which is another problem. Is I think once you know what's happening, things become more predictable. So the cop is in on it, everyone's in on it, the parents are in on it. Like this whole thing where they send their kids off, and there's a whole experimental sci-fi thing to what's going on. But I don't really like twists where everybody is in on it, pretty much, like everyone who isn't a kid in this case, because it cheapens it. I think you don't get as many stakes. It's not as interesting or fun, because I think if you at least had 1 or 2 of the adults who weren't in on it and were sympathetic and trying to protect the kids, I just think that makes it a bit more interesting. Like there's a bit more tension that way. Because I didn't think the horror stuff in this movie really works. Like, because I think partly because it just feels tacked on, is because I just wanted maybe a fun throwback summer camp movie, like coming of age, because as I said, I was quite enjoying the characters. And I guess you could still do, like, I was expecting a horror plot anyway. I wasn't expecting all the rest of it. And maybe to me that stuff just felt tacked on. And I can see how they were going for fresh twists and everything. But yeah, maybe there's a side of me than just wanted a throwback summer camp movie, and then you slowly work the horror stuff into it. I think ultimately it just feels like different movies. Like what we got in the back half, it didn't. That felt tacked on to me. That felt forced for the sake of having twists. It didn't really feel part of the same movie, and ultimately it changed the movie in a way I didn't really like. Some scenes that are actively like just silly and bad also. Like the horror stuff isn't really that good. You know, that scene I was talking about with Morgan in the room with the doctor where he first realizes things are happening. Yeah, I didn't really like that. I thought him screeching was quite annoying, and it just looked kind of cheesy and bad. And the doctor as a villain, or the supposed doctor, it turned out to be who dressed up, or it was one of the other camp counselors dressed up at least, and we started seeing the inner workings of things. And you know, there's certain things like Rachel when we find out she's in on it, and we kind of see. I mean, she's never full on villain because it's not her brainchild, but you know, we kind of see a more villainous side to her, and I think that actress did quite a good job with that. But yeah, they go full hog on the sci-fi premise. They go full hog where it turns out the kids don't even exist by the end of it. Like they're based on real kids, but they're not the actual kids. So who gives this explanation to Morgan and Panya, where he says you're based on kids who died last year, and so we're recreating versions of those kids? And this is another thing, the motivation is just really weak when he lays it out, because he says, oh, hey, I lost a daughter. Last year, I think he says, or probably a few years back, but I lost a daughter. And that's kind of his whole motivation. And that is just so weak, to be honest. That is a really cheap motivation. And another thing that I feel is when you get into some of this sci-fi stuff at the end of the movie, and the fact that these kids technically aren't even real, and the parents are in on it, which I kind of hate as well. But once you get into that stuff and they start throwing in more twists, it made me feel then it would work better as a TV series where they could really pace these things out and develop these twists and themes. The movie's only like an hour and a half, so to throw all these things in the second half of this quite short movie, it just feels a little bit too much, and it feels like on TV some of the developments in the second half would be more satisfying. Because what happens in the final part of the movie, Morgan and Pellier get told this is what we've been doing with these experiments. And it's the Franklin character. The fun part is you can be a part of this. You can be a part of shaping this in the future, because the idea is that they've been doing it for years, and there's been other like summer camps that have been part of the experiments. So he says, you've got that choice. If you want, you can be a part of this. And by the end of the movie, it's obvious that Morgan has become a part of this. He's been a part of shaping the program. And some of that is quite clever. Some of that is actually quite a clever idea and twist. But then we get one final twist, which is then the camp guy gets phoned up and says, well, there's been these defects in these new programs and they're starting to get out of hand. So we get one last final dark twist where Pellier, we've seen that with her because she gets out of hand and malfunctioned, and it looks like she's killed Morgan. I was a bit confused by that, but as someone who looked like Morgan at least is laying dead on the deck, so I guess they're just going for this super dark twist where she's killed him, unless it was one of the others, but it did look like Morgan, so I guess there's a dark irony there if it is, because they had a little bit of a vibe between them. and then the last final shot is she comes in, the blood on her, got the knife, and she just jumps at the summer camp guy who, and that's it. And that's another example where that feels really rushed, like just at the end of it, the movie, just for another big twist. And again, I think that could have worked better in a TV show, because I think you could have introduced, like, you could have started the show with this premise. Then all these summer camps are doing these experiments. Everybody's kind of in on it, including the parents. And then you could have slowly have introduced then there's malfunctions in the system with certain kids. And you could have built to a moment like this where like this character got out of hand and starts killing off people, rather than just have it tacked on the end of this movie for a shock twist. So it did feel like two different movies, and they didn't really jive, and I wasn't fond of the twist overall. And I guess the other thing is I just wanted the other kind of movie more. Maybe I was investing in the characters. And there definitely still could have been like thrills and surprises, and you definitely still could have had dark moments and deaths, but maybe ultimately I wanted the resolution where Morgan ended up, okay, and he ended up with Pelia, and things worked out. I'm not saying neat and tidy. You still could have had a tense, dark end, but yeah, maybe to me that would have been a more satisfying movie. As I said, I think this other idea you could have done better in like a sci-fi TV show. I don't think it quite worked in this movie. So in the end, I'm frustrated. Like, definitely a movie of two halves. Plenty of decent things in there, enjoyable enough at times, but it just fell a bit flat and it was trying too hard by the end. So that's my take on Marshmallow. I'm going to give it 5.5 because it's still decent enough, but it is a frustrating movie. As the movie went on, I became less interested, and it just wasn't the movie than it shaped up to be based on the first half. Some cheesy moments as well with some of the stuff happening. So that's Marshmallow anyway. Let me know what you think of it if you've seen it in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. And you can support me on patreon.com/boardnow, or you can also become a channel member, which I will link in the description. But thanks everyone, hope you're having a good month. See you again soon. Bye.